Welcome to 5 Minutes with God. I'm Steve Campbell, and we're going to be starting a new series about the book of Romans. It's a letter in the New Testament that was written by the Apostle Paul in the first century, somewhere around AD 57 or so. And we'll post a little introduction today, and then we'll have segments on all of the 16 chapters of the book of Romans, one chapter at a time. This is really a significant section of the Bible because Paul is writing to some Christians that he had never met. And he says that in chapter 1, verse 10. He says that he'd been praying if God would allow him to have a way to get to meet them. And then he tells us in verse 11, he tells them what it is that he would have liked to do if he had gotten there in person. He says, I've been praying to get to see you to the end that I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual blessing that would establish you. He says this at the end of verse 11. I really want to see you established. Now, they already had faith. We know this from verse 8. It says that their faith was spoken of throughout the whole world. So these were people who believed God and were followers of God. And yet Paul says to them, what I really want to do is visit you so that I could establish you. This is a really great word, established. It means to make something stronger, to strengthen something, but not strengthen like you strengthen a muscle. It's more like strengthening something the way you strengthen the support beams of your deck or some part of your house. It's the idea of making something firm and immovable and stable. He wants to give their faith a solid foundation. He wants to stabilize them in their faith. And this is really perfect for anyone who's a believer in God. This is what we would like to know. And Paul says, well, if I ever came to visit you, you people in Rome, that's what I'd like to talk about. But now I'm just going to turn to the end of the book of Romans, chapter 16, really close to the end, verse 25. Paul says that God is able to establish them according to the gospel that he's been preaching, according to the teachings of what he's written to them. God is able to establish them. And so what this means is that essentially what Paul wrote in this letter is exactly what he would have said if he had come to them in person. The things that he wrote to them in this letter are the things that God would use to establish them, to stabilize them in their faith. And since Paul was in the position of having to write it down and didn't get to say it to them in person, actually it's a really wonderful benefit for us because that means that we get a chance now to read the things that would establish and stabilize these Roman believers, and therefore they establish and stabilize us as well. So the book of Romans is really perfect for anyone who is believing in God, anyone who's following God. We start from a place of faith like the Romans did, but then we find out that there's so much teaching that will establish us and stabilize us in our faith. And so what we'd like to do in this upcoming series is go through these chapters, take a look at them one at a time, and propose a key verse from each chapter and give a little summary, a little overview, so that it's a little easier to carry this book with us. Not just in our thoughts, in our minds, in our understanding, but in our hearts. It's really what God wants us to appreciate about himself. It's essentially like a masterful courtroom drama that Paul has written. He starts from the place of conflict, defining the problem, calling forth different lines of evidence, and then presenting some amazing verdicts about who God is and things that are verdicts about us as well. I hope that you'll be able to follow along as we go through this upcoming series. We'll be posting a new video each couple of days, every 2 or 3 days maybe, and I hope you'll find them instructive and encouraging. God knows what we need, and he knows how to establish us in our faith.